Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Healing Words podcast. Tim Wade is a former public school educator, college pastor, prison counselor, and inmate sponsor. He has written over 100 devotionals published by various ministries. His debut novel, Pieces in Time, explores the impact of Alzheimer's disease, a condition that has affected three members of his family. Thank you for joining me today, Tim.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so your story is inspired by your family history with Alzheimer's. How did your experience shape the writing of this story, and what emotions did you draw upon?
A lot of the story came originally whenever I was about 8 or 9 years old and watched my grandmother take care of my mom's dad and how he lived his life, how she lived her life as his caregiver. And I developed characters centered around those memories. And I remember so many times watching them and how I felt and later understanding how my mother felt because this was her dad and
Mm.
watching how she felt and all the things she was going through. So I drew from those experiences and was able to articulate them to some degree through the characters
Mhm.
that were developed within the book.
Okay, so you had three family members affected by Alzheimer's. Could you tell us who they were?
Yes, initially my grandfather, my mom's dad, had Alzheimer's early onset. Whenever
Mhm.
he was about early 50s, he was diagnosed. He died of pneumonia whenever he was 59 after several years of growing dementia, Alzheimer's. Um, then I'm thinking in 2000, my dad's mother died at age 95 with Alzheimer's and dementia. And then in 2004, my mom's mother passed away with Alzheimer's. She was 72, I believe. No, 78. 78. I
Okay.
have my numbers a little bit backwards there.
So when you're going through this, did you get the feeling like the Alzheimer's and dementia, they're the same, they affected each of the member the same, yet it was different? Or did you see the same pattern with each person?
There was a difference between each person.
Okay.
Um, I think my grandfather was a lot more confused, a lot more disoriented. His personality was very childlike whenever he was going through his Alzheimer's. I remember one time whenever he was he got moved to a mental health facility, and was lumped in with all these different uh, other patients. And he got hit in the face by one of the patients,
Mm.
and he cried like a baby. He didn't know what happened. He didn't know why he was hit. So he developed it that way. He was very childlike, as far as I understand. That's my memory. My grandmother, his wife, um, was was not as uh, emotional in that sense. I remember sitting with her in the early days of her Alzheimer's diagnosis, and basically, I hate to say this, but I lied to her and told her that she was just simply getting older, and that
Mhm.
was part of getting older was forgetting things and not understanding things. She was a little more bold whenever it came to dealing with the Alzheimer's because she had seen it with my grandfather. She knew
Uh,
what she was getting into. Uh, Now, my dad's mother, whenever she developed Alzheimer's and dementia, I was not present for most of that episode, but I do remember stories about how she became very much like a little girl, and she was very playful. And she pulled her dress up one time. This was from a very dignified woman who would never have
done something
possibly
like
done that. So there were different aspects to each of my grandparents that were very unique. Their personalities came out in different ways with the Alzheimer's, but in all, they forgot who they were. They did
Right,
not remember uh, who God made them to be. And it was very
right, right.
sad.
I'm listening to you talk about your grandmother who was dignified and had that one slip because there's something like that in the story that you wrote that is mentioned about the lady who has Alzheimer's. Could you give us a little bit of a summary of your story?
Yes. The story basically is about a woman named Karen Miller who goes her childhood home in Oklahoma to visit her mother who has late stage Alzheimer's. And when she gets there, she finds out that her mother has had a mini stroke, if you will, and develops pneumonia. And within about 3.5, 4 days of being there, her mother passes away.
Mhm.
And that is something that she had not planned. She also had not planned on understanding her parents, well, her father and her aunt's relationship with her mother in light of the fact that her mother no longer knew who they were. Uh, they no longer visited her on a regular basis because she did not know if they were there from
Right.
one day to the next. Um, and so Karen goes through all these emotional upheavals, trying to understand why her father's acting the way that he is toward her mother. Why is her aunt acting this way toward her mother? And as a result, she's trying to reconcile those relationships with her own feelings, her own emotions,
Mhm.
and nothing's making sense. These are puzzle pieces that are not in place yet. And she's going through the process of dealing with her mother's loss, and she's dealing with her father's understanding of the relationship and her aunt's understanding of the relationship. And throughout the whole process, Dad's starting to tell family secrets that uh, we were not prepared to find out about. And ultimately, in the end, there is one family secret that comes out that puts everything together, and all the puzzle pieces form a great big picture. And
Yeah.
life suddenly takes a whole different shape.
Well, I have to tell you that I did not see that plot twist coming. Uh, it, it literally just sneaks up on you. Because as he's starting to reveal, your mind is going this way, but and then when it comes out, you're like, "Wow, I did not see that
Mhm.
coming." And for me, when I read it, at some point, because when you start reading it, Alzheimer's is what's on your mind, because
Correct.
but after a while, I sensed a switch, and what I recognized from this book, this is a story of sacrifice.
Yes.
Yeah, sacrifice.
It begins with the sacrifice of Karen's father, who was left behind with a wife who did not know what was happening to her. She
Hmm.
was very confused, very disoriented. She got the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and suddenly her life just, it was a death sentence.
Hmm.
And the dad uh, had to retire from his ministry as a pastor just to take care of his wife.
Hmm.
And he gave up a, a 35, 45-year career as a minister. And then on top of that, he gave up his sleep, he gave up his time, he gave a huge sacrifice. It's very common for Alzheimer's patients to wander off. In this particular case, in this story, Edna wandered off 3 times, possibly a fourth time. And those are very taxing on an individual. I remember my own grandfather went with me on a walk and told me that we needed to continue going down the street. I was probably 8 years old whenever we did this. And I didn't know that he was disoriented. I didn't know that he was able to wander off and get lost. And I did not fully comprehend how my grandmother had sacrificed so much of her life as his caregiver and how worried she was. So whenever he decided he wanted to just keep walking, he said, "Well, you go ahead and go on home and I'll meet you there." And when
Right.
I walked home, my grandmother said, "Where's your grandfather?" And I said, "Well, he went that way." And she freaked out. And I, at that point, began to realize my grandmother was watching my grandfather, uh, his every move. She couldn't
24/7.
possibly live her life without watching over him. She couldn't
Yeah.
sleep. She couldn't eat without making sure that he was okay.
Yeah.
That was my first real understanding of how much my grandmother was sacrificing to take care of my grandfather.
The exhaustion of Edna's husband, the caregiver, it just leaps off the page, even apart from where he's describing it at the end of the book to his daughter. But there's another, and I don't want to give away too much, but I do want to say this because this was so sad, and I'm wondering if you noticed this in your grandparents. Um, Edna, the main character, the mother, she was aware that she was losing her memories because she would have journal entries. And I remember the one in there where she said, "This is my last journal entry. I can't remember
Mhm.
things anymore." Did you see that in your grandparents? Were they aware that they were losing their memory?
I based the journal entries off of my grandmother's experiences. Now,
Ah,
my grandmother did not keep a journal, but I remember having conversations with her about her memory loss. And in
mm,
light of the fact that my grandfather had died with Alzheimer's, she knew what she was facing. And it frightened her. It frightened
mm.
her badly. So those were the emotions that I placed in the journal entries within the story. A lot of those were my grandmother's fears, her concerns about Alzheimer's.
Let's talk about family dynamic and memory. When um, secrets and unresolved issues come to light, is it different when the person has memory loss? Do we treat it different? Does it affect the family dynamic different? I'm thinking about the story.
There is, and I'm sort of reluctant to say too much, but there is a secret in my family that is revealed in a different way in the novel
Okay.
that was shared with my dad.
Mhm.
Um, this secret was shared with my father. My father's responsibility at some point was to share it with my mother.
Mhm.
And whenever he made the decision to share it with her, it was in light of the fact that my grandfather had Alzheimer's and would not remember this secret. He would
Mm,
forget about this.
okay.
Um, so it was not as devastating to him. But it's really sad to look at who you are, all the memories that you've made, and know that those memories are going away. Uh, you have family members, and you have, in my case, I have five other cousins, and I remember my grandmother, my dad's mom, always going down the list and calling us all by other cousins' names until she got to yours. And I remember so much thinking that there's going to come a day when she's not going to remember those names anymore. And at some point, she's going to realize that um, those secrets, those understandings, all those histories are going to be lost forever. So, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to look at those dynamics and know that they're going to be forgotten.
Right. You got to, in addition to actually living this, you got to actually see this in your real life. On your blog, you tell a story of sitting in a restaurant and there's a woman and a man sitting near you who've been married for years, and
Mhm.
you could tell the path they were on. Can you describe that for us?
Yes, I will never forget that because I sat there and almost cried. She had with her a book, a hardbound book that she brought with brought with her into the restaurant, and showed it to her husband. And they ordered their meal, and she began to thumb through the book and show him the pictures in the book. And she ordered the food for him and then would explain a picture. They would eat a little bit, and then she would explain a picture, and she'd say, "Do you remember this?" And he would point to the picture, and she'd tell him, "That's you right there," or "That's us. This is where we went." And I realized that this was, first of all, this was the anniversary of their meeting. This was
Oh,
sometime around January 1. Uh, Maybe it was the anniversary of his proposal to her, but it was a special time, but it was the last time that he was going to remember. And she got choked up. You could see it. She knew that that was going to be the last anniversary.
so it was still made an impression on you, even having lived through it, to actually see it
Yes,
in front of you.
I I remember how close my dad's parents were, especially. Um, they were ministers, home missionaries. They shared every ounce of life together for 90 years or more, off and on. Well, they weren't married that long, but they were both 95 years old whenever they died, 4 years apart. And there was this closeness that they had to each other. And I remember thinking as I watched this couple in this restaurant talk about their past and their life, I remember thinking my grandparents had a relationship that was that close. And I wondered how my grandfather would feel, you know, knowing that his wife is not going to remember those memories anymore, those special times, those anniversaries.
So, in addition to Alzheimer's, in addition to sacrificial giving, living, your book also has a theme of a crisis of faith. Because once this family secret comes to light, Karen, our main character, has a crisis of faith. And you walk her through that. What is it that you hope readers gain from that?
Well, I want the readers to know that everybody experiences a time in their life whenever God just doesn't make sense. Uh, we have an understanding in our minds about who God is. We believe that He is. My lights just went out for some reason. Um,
That's okay.
we believe that God is one way. He presents Himself in another way, and our expectations are not contingent on uh, on what he does or doesn't do. I mean, he doesn't do things our way. He doesn't do things according to the way that we think they ought to be. Uh, who God is in the Bible is who we should understand Him as our Lord, our Savior, and family members skew those things. Karen looks at her father, who's been a pastor all of her life, and she can't understand why dad doesn't go spend every last moment of his day with his wife.
Right.
And she says, "Well, you should be laying down your life for for your wife here?" And he says, "I did."
Not knowing that he has.
He has laid it down. Um, but her interpretation of scripture does not jive with what he's doing. His Her aunt Jean is in a similar situation. At least her dad goes and visits mom once a week. Jean
Right.
hasn't seen her sister in months.
Right.
And Karen, the main character, looks at all this and says, "This is not how we should treat people. This is not how God meant for us to be toward the people that we love." And she questions her family. This is the family that she drew her strength from. This is the family that she understood her God through, because this is her father who was her pastor. Um, and then on top of all of this, then you have the ultimate question that everybody asks: how can bad things happen to good people? I mean, mom has lived a righteous life. The term that I have used in the book is monastic. She was not going to get married originally. Then
That's
that
right.
changed. She decided to get married, have a family, but she sacrificed her career in order to have a family,
Right.
and she was devoted to God. She was devoted to Jesus, and yet all of a sudden now there's the Alzheimer's, there's
Right.
the pneumonia. How dare you, God, do something like this to my mother?
Exactly. I come to visit my mother and I ended up going to her funeral.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And by the way, what's up with my family? They're supposed to be my strength, my pillar. They're not there for mom. They're not there for me. What's going on? And
Right.
ultimately, Karen just kind of throws her hands up and says, "I quit. This is it. I don't care. And just it doesn't make sense anymore."
Yeah.
And I think we all go through that at some time, especially whenever you look at somebody that you deeply love who has Alzheimer's,
Mm.
and you question how God could possibly take away somebody so beautiful that you love so much. How can they take away their life? It just
Right.
doesn't make sense.
It's the questions, that we ask. And I sometimes wonder if that comes from the thought that bad things shouldn't happen to believers. Uh, um, I I read a post. I read someone had a post on Facebook a few days ago, and she was going through the fruits of the spirit, and one of them is long suffering. And
Hmm.
you don't have to worry about long suffering if everything is going well. That's right there letting you know that things aren't always going to be well.
Yeah. I spent, I don't want to get too personal, but I spent about 35, 40 years dealing with suicidal depression, and began to question whether or not God was really on my side,
Mm,
trying to understand what was happening to me. How could God possibly love me and let me feel this way? I know that in the book, Gus also became very depressed,
very depressed.
and I was able to feel his emotion. I was able to write it down just based on my own feelings, my own experiences.
Mhm.
Uh, and then, of course, looking at it through the lens of my grandmother and my grandfather as the caregivers, you just question whether or not God is really there for you, or if you're on your own. Am I alone? Ultimately, I think I, I reference Romans 8:28 in the
Mhm.
book, that all things do indeed work together for good. But the term good in that particular case is not contingent upon our opinion of what is right or wrong, what is good or bad. It is a manifestation of God's greatness and how
Wow.
he's working through the circumstances in order to bring us closer to him.
Closer to
That's
his
good.
image. Mhm. Right. Exactly. Um, so speaking along those lines, you did have a post on your blog about these feelings, how your past is coloring and inserting itself in your present. And is that the revelation that you walked away with?
Yes, whenever you look at the past and you try to understand your present, you have a lot of baggage that you have to unpack.
Hmm.
And I remember looking at myself and all the things that I had gone through in my life with my depression and my emotions and my feelings toward my family and all the Alzheimer's that had gone on through there and the loss of family and the understanding of God in that light. And, um, and was able to take what was inside of me with those emotions and those feelings and transfer them to my characters to some degree. There's no one particular character that has all of those feelings.
Hmm.
No one character has all the emotions, but there's pieces. And if you
Hmm.
get to know me as a person, you'll get to know those characters individually, and you'll be able to say, well, there's this element and that element. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
It does. It
it uh,
does.
it it's where I've learned how to translate everything that's from the inside and work it out with fear and trembling, if you will.
You're doing much to raise awareness of Alzheimer's. Are there any statistics, any information you feel led to share now? Any things you're concerned about?
Well, Alzheimer's really, they start taking numbers at about age 55 to 60. I believe the number is about 5% of the people with Alzheimer's develop it within 55 to 60-year range. That number goes up to, I believe, 13 when you hit into the mid 60s and on up into 20 or 30% of people that develop Alzheimer's are in their 70s. So as you get older, you're much more likely to develop Alzheimer's. It's there's no real rhyme or reason right now. Science is really moving forward quickly when it comes to understanding what causes Alzheimer's and how to abate some of the symptoms. They don't have a cure yet, but they do have a lot of medication today that can push those symptoms down. But still, you're looking at 7 million people in this country who have Alzheimer's. And that is a staggering number in light of also the fact that you have 11.5 million caregivers who are unpaid who are taking care of these people with Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And that is a lot of emotional baggage that you're carrying with you whenever
Right.
you have to sacrifice your entire life to take care of somebody that you're watching die in front of you. Um,
That's right.
and
There is no recovery.
there's no recovery. You're going to, I mean, I hate to say it like this, but it's been said, it's a death sentence.
Mhm.
Alzheimer's is a death sentence, and you will eventually die of Alzheimer's in some way or another. Um, I personally am a little concerned because I do have the history in my family. I am aware of the fact that I am very prone to to this kind of illness. So we'll just have to wait and see what time holds. But I'm not too terribly scared at this moment. I'm only 56 years old, so so far so good.
So far, so good. Is the memory loss The forgetfulness, is that the first? Is that the primary sign? Is there something
Uh,
else you're looking for?
Not exactly. First signs can be anything from just general forgetfulness, uh, just misplacing keys, maybe forgetting a security code or getting some numbers transposed or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, what we typically associate with Alzheimer's in forgetting who the president is or forgetting the name of a loved one. Those symptoms oftentimes don't come until later stages.
Mm,
There can be a lot of other signs and symptoms. I am not an expert on the disease itself, but I do know that uh, there are telltale signs, there are blood tests, there are spinal
mhm.
fluid tests that can be taken that will reveal whether or not at age 35, 40, 45, or 50, if you'll develop Alzheimer's whenever you're 65 or 70.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
They are developing tests today that look way in the future.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't want to know this information. They don't want to find out whether or not they're prone to have Alzheimer's one day.
Would you want to? Have you had the test?
I have not been tested. I don't want to be tested.
Hmm.
Uh, I I'm not comfortable right now in my own skin just yet. I'm still making memories. I'm still
There you
trying to
go.
make memories.
Keep making your memories. Are you working on, this is your debut book out
Yes.
this past summer. Are you working on another project? Do you have anything else in the wings?
Well, I have two projects that I'm working on right now. Uh, Spoiler alert here, I used to weigh almost 400 pounds, and I
Really?
had bariatric surgery about a year and almost 2 years ago. I've
Okay.
lost over 200 pounds.
Hmm.
And so, one of the projects that I have working right now is a book about bariatric principles in the Bible.
Ah,
A lot of people don't understand that the Bible speaks about weight loss as much as it does any other subject. You just
okay.
have to know where to look. And
Okay.
then the second project that I'm working on is the sequel to Pieces in Time. The working title right now for that is Tyler's Run. It's
Tyler is the son.
Tyler is the son. He's the baby of the family,
Hmm.
and I can't give anything away about that just yet because, quite honestly, the main character again, Karen Miller, hasn't told me a whole lot about what's going on. As you well know, as an author, these stories kind of tell you
Yeah,
what's happening.
they tell you what's happening. Oh, I must say, I enjoyed the way her husband was drawn. I can't think. Wade, was it Wade?
Dave,
Dave. Yeah,
yes,
something about Dave. I really appreciate. I was drawn to him. I think he's a good support for her. He laid low and laid off when he needed to. I think only one time that I remember him saying something like kind of like get it together, or maybe that's the way I read it.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, I really liked him.
Dave is the kind of person that I wanted to be as a husband. I
Oh,
wanted to be supportive. I wanted to be compassionate, not trying to fix my wife.
hmm.
If I had my druthers, I'd rather be like Dave than be like the guy that I am right now because I'm quite imperfect. Uh,
He really gave her the space she needed. I know she got a little, I don't want to say mouthy, but I know it was her emotions, and he never responded to that. He always took the boys off when she needed to sit because again, these secrets that came out,
yeah,
she just needed to hear and talk to her father. He'd be out in the backyard playing with the boys, or he'd be giving them a bath. And I was like, that was remarkable to me. And then they'd all get back together and talk.
I
Yeah.
got to tell you, it was funny whenever I read the book to my wife. She wanted me to read it to her, and I did. And we got into the first chapter where Dave has driven 24
24
hours
hours.
on it. It was his choice to take it 24 straight hours. That's fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
But he gets there and he's tired, and suddenly mom has had this stroke, and now they've got to go to the hospital, and Dave is just worn out. My wife looked at me and she goes, Dave just wants to take a nap.
Oh,
And it's like, I know the poor guy is just drained,
yeah.
and yet we're still asking more of him.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's the support that he gives. But we're going to see a lot more of Dave in the sequel, and Dave is
Okay.
going to be a lot more human than Superman.
Okay. Okay. All right. So where can our viewers find you on social media? Your
I
website, if
am
you're on Facebook or anything?
I am on Facebook, Tim Wade. You can find me at either Chef Wade. That was my handle before I became an author. I'm also under author Tim Wade on Facebook. If you want to, you can go to my website, iamtimwade.com, and you can click on the icons there for X and LinkedIn and Facebook. They'll take you all three to right there to
Okay.
those media sites.
I've forgotten that you were a chef. You told me you were a chef. I've forgotten all about that.
That was a past life, but yes.
Okay, so we are the Healing Words Podcast. I'm going to ask you the same 5 questions I ask all of our guests. Healing Words Podcast, first letter from the word words. When? When did W win? When did you know for certain that you would write this book?
um, Getting back to the chef thing, when COVID hit in April, March of 2020, I had a story I had written a couple of chapters down and filed away. And after I got laid off from my job because of COVID, this story kind of began to talk to me from the pages of my computer, and it kept telling me that there was something out there. And so I sat down. My wife was an essential worker. My kids were in their late teens, early 20s, and they were essential workers. So they went to work during the quarantine, and I stayed home. And in May of 2020, I spent 1 month solid writing this book. But that was the first draft.
Mhm.
The the revisions took 4 years.
Oh, yes. That sounds
So
about right. When you said 1 month, I was like, oh, that's good.
yeah, people look at me and go, "You wrote this in a month?" Well, I wrote the draft in a month.
There you
I
are.
revised it for the next 4 years. So
Okay. Organize. How did you organize? Well, you just told us that COVID, you weren't working. Um, so that's how you organized your day to get the writing done.
I did sacrifice a lot of time to do that, and I did spend some 12-hour days
Mhm.
uh, just pushing through. When you write, you have to learn the craft of writing as you go. You
Yes.
don't just sit down and you know how it is.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
You don't just sit down and put down a story. You have to learn, you have to research, you have to develop. And so, yeah, the organization part was basically going to school and figuring out how to be a writer. I've written a lot of nonfiction, but this was
Right.
my first time writing fiction. And I have people that look at me and say, "Do you not know how to punctuate dialogue?" And I'm thinking, well, sort of, you know.
I was a journalist for a little while. And as such, somehow I developed the notion that fiction was easier than nonfiction, but it
Mhm.
is not. I found that it was not. because even if it's fiction, it has to be, it must be believable.
Yes.
And
That's
a
the
lot
thing.
of work goes into that.
That's the thing that I like about Pieces in Time.
Mhm.
It is a believable story. It's not
Yeah,
something that is science fiction. It's not fantasy. And it's not boy meets girl, girl meets boy, falls in love and out of love, and everybody then meets up and lives happily ever after. It's not that kind of a story. If you need a story that you can relate to, if you've ever been a caregiver, if you've ever had somebody who has Alzheimer's, if you've ever had a crisis of faith, you're going to read this story and say, "Yeah, I've been there, done that. I feel you."
yeah, but not just that, Tim. The imagery there when they went to dinner with the
Mhm.
sister and the aunt and the uncle, I could sense the hole in the wall that they were sitting in. You see what I'm saying? I could
Yeah,
feel that from your description. I think at one point you mentioned the brown old couch in the living room, and then there was a recliner next to it. I could see that.
hmm
Yeah,
yeah.
very, very vivid.
There's a lot of that room, the house itself, that that comes out of my grandparents' house.
Oh, okay.
The gray desk that's in the corner in the dining
Yep.
room,
Mm-hmm.
there. The round table that is being eaten at every single meal, that was
Yes.
my other grandparents' table. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the recliner back at my grandmother's house, the couch, my grandmother's house. So
Okay.
all of those are elements of my own past, my own family.
Mm-hmm. I want to get back to our alphabet. We
Yeah,
said O for organized, but what about O for obstacles? Were there any obstacles that you had to overcome? I'm wondering emotional, maybe psychological obstacles, because it sounds like some of your family was coming up in the story and some of your memories.
I the biggest emotional obstacle that I had was remembering whenever my grandmother passed away. Um, I went to Oklahoma, where this story takes place, by the way,
Hmm.
and my grandmother died. I went with my mother to the funeral home to plan her funeral, and she's my grandmother was already in her casket, and I remember standing at the door, looking across the room at my grandmother in her casket, and I describe that feeling and that scene in the book whenever Karen goes to the viewing, to the visitation.
Hmm.
And I feel like that what she experienced in that story is what I experienced. And I had to
Right.
relive that feeling. You have to sort of document your emotions. And whenever you do, uh, it hurts. It's
Yeah.
not easy. I will tell you right off the bat, whenever I wrote that scene about her crossing the room to see her mother, I cried.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it brought back memories of my own grandmother and how I felt whenever I walked across the room and I suddenly had this reality hit me. Uh, this person's gone. I'll never see her again.
Yeah. And
So,
even though while they were here and you were seeing them, they really weren't here.
correct.
I
Yeah.
remember I have a friend of mine, and her mother had a disease, and I can't remember what it was, but she lived, I think it was 12 or 15 years past the doctor's predictions. And when her mother finally died, she said to me, and she says, Pam, you're the only person I can tell this to. I'm so glad she's gone.
Yeah.
And she felt so much guilt and shame for saying that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I relate to that because my wife and I have a daughter, well, my stepdaughter, who had a brain injury whenever she was not quite 4 years old. And she was medically fragile. She could
Mhm.
not walk, she couldn't talk, she couldn't eat. Everything she was fed was through a G tube. So she required 24-hour care. And we took care of her up until the day she died. She spent her last week in the hospital with respiratory failure, which, by the way, just as a caveat, all the information of Edna's passing in the story,
Mhm.
all the numbers were from my daughter's passing whenever she died of respiratory failure. But whenever, yeah, you heard that right. I used my own daughter's death in order to document Edna's death.
When I read that, I said to myself, because in my former life, I was a disability analyst for Social Security Administration. So I said, this is weirdly specific and
Mm,
it's correct when you were reading the numbers on the monitor.
yes. But we took care of Maria for the last 11 years of her life in our home. And my wife and I were her primary caregivers. But I will tell you, as COVID hit, we lost our nursing support until finally we were taking care of her day and night. My wife would stay up with her at night and then go to work the next morning and pull a 12-hour day.
Oh,
And I would take care of her during the daytime. And if Shannon had a day off, then I would go to work and Shannon would stay home with Maria. And we played this game up until the day that Maria passed away. And I will be honest, just like you said, whenever she did pass away, you take a sigh of, take a deep breath and a sigh of relief and say, it's over.
right.
And you feel so much relief and at the same time so much guilt. And that's sort of what Gus felt
Oh,
whenever
yes.
he finally did put Edna in the nursing home,
Right.
because he was finally able to
To get
let it
some
all
sleep. He was
get some.
not sleeping. Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Um, I want to ask a question. I know we're on the alphabet here, but I forgot to ask this, and this is remarkable to me. You wrote this as a woman. Your main character is a woman. Did you set out to do that? Why not have it a man whose family member is dying? Was that a conscious choice to make that a female?
I I I based a lot of this on the fact that my mother lost her father, and I sort of flipped the mother-father relationship in the story, but I saw my mother as my muse. Uh,
Mm,
there was there's a significant age difference. My mother was in her late 20s whenever her father passed away. Karen is 38, so there's about a 10-year age difference. But I always heard the story from my mother's perspective. If my mother was the one telling the story, uh, Karen was the one telling the story. And so I just wrote down what Karen told me was going on. And
right.
I was very concerned that I was not going to capture a female voice. And
You
I,
did.
I even hired an editor who was female
Hmm.
to go back and read the book and tell me, did I miss it or did I get it? And she never questioned anything. And I didn't want to
Right.
be stereotypical. Women are emotional and men are, whatever they are supposed to be.
Right.
I didn't want to play to those stereotypes at all. And I don't think I did.
You didn't. No, no. Very well done. As a matter of fact, I forgot to ask that question until now. It popped in my head. Okay, so R, rear view. Let's switch now to the crisis of faith dilemma of this. Now that you know what you know, the next time, how has writing this book unearthing and solving some of the answers, questions you have, how will that affect your next crisis of faith? If you want to look in the rear view, let's do it that way.
Um, if I understand your question correctly, um, looking at what's next for the characters, is that what you're asking?
Let's try it this way.
Okay.
Knowing what you know, right, knowing what you know now
Mm-hmm.
about um, sacrifice,
Yes.
sacrificial, um, bad things happening to good people. Where is
Right.
God? Why is God silent? Knowing what you know now, what would you have told yourself years ago when you were having crisis of faith? When
Okay.
you, the depression, the anxiety, has coming through this resolved any questions for you?
Yeah. Um, it's like I was saying earlier, uh, the the definition of good in the Bible is very unique. Uh, you don't realize just what God is doing in your life through your situation, through your circumstances, through all the crisis of faith until you come out the other side. If I could go back and tell my younger self uh, what the outcome would be, or at least why the outcome would be what it became, I would tell myself to uh, allow God to shape me through my pain,
Mm,
to shape me and conform me to the image of Jesus Christ, just like it says in Romans 8 28, 29, 30.
hmm.
Uh, whom he called and he had foreknowledge, uh, he, he conformed us to the image of his son.
Right.
Um, I was, I'm convinced that God prayed for me, that the Holy Spirit prayed for me with those groans and utterances that cannot be articulated long before I went through the crisis of my own faith. And I believe that anybody who has a crisis of faith needs to understand that they have an advocate that is praying for them, that is God Himself, that it is Jesus Christ
Right.
is praying for them, and those circumstances are shaping us. They're changing us. They're molding us into being somebody that is more Christ-like. I don't mean to preach, but
No.
at the same time, I do believe that we don't realize just what God's doing, how great He's working through us. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no
No shadow of turning.
shadow of turning. Uh,
Right.
the the circumstances that in which we find ourselves in, the pain, the suffering, the crisis, those are gifts. Those are beautiful gifts from God. But you have to embrace them. You have to
They
overcome.
don't they don't feel like gifts though. We don't realize they're gifts until they're in the rear view.
Exactly. Well, hindsight's 2020. But when you do get on the other side, you can look back in the rearview mirror and you can say, "Wow, I wasn't alone." It's
Right.
like the old it's like the old poem about footprints in the sand,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I love that because they said, "Well, God, I see the two sets of footprints, but uh, then they stop. There's only one set of footprints. Where were you?" He said, "I was there, but I was carrying you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my footprints, not yours. I
Right.
was carrying you." And that's what
Two
God.
things, two things that this is making me think of. One of them is that again, he has done more than we can even articulate.
Yeah.
He's done more than his part. And sometimes I have to, when I'm praying, I have to remember that he's done more than his part. He doesn't do anything else from now until the end. He's already exceeded. And the second thing is, it's such a solemn thought that there are some things you only learn through pain. There's
Yes.
some things you only learn through suffering.
Yes.
And there's a scripture that even says that Jesus learned through his suffering.
Yes. Jesus's focus was from the day that he was born, his focus was on the cross. It gave his life purpose, it gave it meaning, and it was for the purpose of the cross that he came and suffered and bled and died for our sins. It's it's what you and I need to understand whenever we live sacrificially for other people. Whenever he says, "Lay your life down for your brothers and your sisters," uh,
Mhm.
live sacrificially. Be focused on the cross of Christ, and don't push that opportunity away.
Mm,
Embrace the suffering. Embrace the pain. Find
wow.
purpose and meaning in your life through what you've been through. Grace recycles our problems.
Wow. There is a wonderful song. I hear it maybe once or twice a year, and I just get floored. The young man's last name is Engel. I don't know if it's Josh Engel. Anyway, the name of the song is called In the Shadow of the Cross. And it's basically, I thought about it right when you said that the cross was ever before him.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's an amazing song.
if it wasn't for the cross, Jesus would have no reason to be here today. That was the only purpose that he came. But
Mm,
what's really amazing, if you think about it, and I was talking to my wife about this the other day, Jesus spent 33 years knowing that he was going to die. And he didn't flinch. You and I don't know what's going to happen in our future.
mm,
Yet we have a life that uh, we try to preserve, we try to hold back, as if what we have is something so special that we don't want to get rid of it. It's those pearls that are
right.
plastic. And yet Jesus knew that he was going to die and went anyway. He said, "This is more important. This is greater than anything that I could ever give you." And here we are in our world asking God, take away these pains, take away this problem. And he's
Right.
looking at it going, but if you do, I can't give you the real pearls. I can't give you the jewels, the glory that comes from me as a result of you going through these crises of
Things
faith.
that you're going through. I I was praying about, I don't know, maybe it's been 3 months now. It's something, you know how sometimes you're praying and the Holy Spirit is praying along with you and something comes up and
Mhm.
you think about it later. And I had this thought, you know how sometimes as men, as mankind, we say yes, but deep inside we mean no, or perhaps maybe. But we say yes because yes is a thing to say. Even when he was being beat, even when he was nailed on the cross, Jesus's yes was 100% yes. If he had even thought no, everything would have stopped.
Yeah,
He was full on yes. And that
yeah,
is such a humbling thought because he didn't say, okay, God, I'm going to do this because you want me to.
yeah.
You know, it wasn't a half yes. It was full 100 yes. And because of who he is, and the deity that he holds, if he had even thought no, while he was saying yes, while his physical body was presenting yes, if he had even thought no, he would have shut it all down.
He wanted a relationship with you and I. He has always desired that. If you go back and I don't want to get too crazy on this topic, but if you go back to Genesis and you look at the original creation, it was for God and man to have a face-to-face relationship. Whenever the nation of Israel, when the Hebrews sinned and they were wandering in the wilderness for all those years after the original sin, God set forth the tabernacle so that he could be in the midst of his people. He told Moses, build me a tabernacle. I want to have a face-to-face relationship with you again. It worked for a short season, but then they sinned again. So then John 1:14 says, so then Jesus came in the flesh and dwelt among us.
Mhm.
Well, the word dwelt in the Greek is tabernacle, tent.
Mm. He
So
tabernacled.
he came to tabernacle with us in a face-to-face relationship. To
Right.
what end? You go back to Revelation, when it's all said and done with, we're going to have a face-to-face relationship with our Heavenly Father and with the Son of God, Jesus Christ. And that's been the desire of Jesus from the day that the earth was set in motion. He wanted you and I to have a face-to-face relationship with him. And when he saw that cross and he said, now here's the chance for us to finally get this right. We didn't get it right in the beginning. Man decided it was more important to be like God than to love God. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't get it right in the wilderness because man felt like it was more important to follow the rules and to make their own rules.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just go ahead and let's get it right once and for all. I'll die for the sins.
Right.
I will let my yes be yes, and
And
we
that's
will
it.
seal the deal.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's amazing.
I'm
It
convinced of
is
it.
the gift that keeps on giving.
Amen. Want to get back to your words?
So let's get back to our story. Okay. So for the D, you have been very vulnerable, very open. But in your writing of this, and even on your blog, and since we know that some of this is has some of your family story in there, was there anything so personal you thought, maybe I should delete that? That's the D. Maybe this is too much. Maybe I shouldn't put that in there. People who know me are going to know what this means, so maybe I should leave that out.
um, I didn't really. The only thing that got deleted that was of any major importance was the physical address
Mm.
of my grandmother's house.
Oh, okay.
I was encouraged not to be so specific that I had people read the book and think, well, let's go find the house. So even though it is set in Clinton, Oklahoma, which is the place where I was born, where my mother was raised, and where my grandmother is buried, my grandfather's buried, um, it I did not use the real address. Um, I took everything that was everything else and and just pretty much laid it out there. There was one scene, one statement that was made that I really questioned if I should leave it in or take it out. And that's whenever Karen makes the statement that the two busiest places in town were the alcohol store and the employment office or the welfare office.
Okay, yes, I remember that.
So I didn't want Oklahoma, Clinton especially, to come across as a as a place for homeless, derelict,
Yeah.
whatever. I didn't want to make that seem that way, but uh, I know that there are people, and I won't say if it's in my family or if it's my own opinion, but there are people who do subscribe to that opinion about
Mm.
Clinton, Oklahoma.
Oh, I get it.
It is a fairly impoverished town.
Hmm.
There
Hmm.
used to be thousands of people that lived in Clinton, but not anymore. It's
Okay.
dwindling, and jobs are very scarce, and so there is a lot of welfare in there, and there is a lot of alcoholism.
I think it was effective. Um, I think it was effective in driving home the kind of place, the kind of environment that it was. I don't think it didn't come across to me. Now, I've never been to Clinton, but it didn't come across to me that it was derogatory in any way. Have you heard that?
I have not heard that, and nobody's really stated much, but the book is still in its infancy, and there is there's going to be a group from the Oklahoma area that will eventually
Say
give an
that.
opinion, see it, and give an opinion. So I'm waiting for that day, and I hope whenever it comes that it's not from angry people. I'll say
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Okay, S, and you've mentioned this throughout our talk. How have you been strengthened by the writing of this book?
Personally, that is at least twofold. Strengthened as a writer, number one, I've learned how to write, gotten better, honed my craft as a writer. That has given me a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning in my life. It's really helped my self esteem quite a bit just because I didn't think I was a good writer. I didn't have peer review. I know there's a lot of people out there today who want to write and they say, well, I don't know how to write.
Mm,
Let me just say, if you're willing to be critiqued, if you're willing to go through the didactic criticism that good authors will give you,
mhm.
then uh, indeed start writing and
That's how
go
you
for it.
learn.
That's how you learn. But in the spiritual sense, the story itself has strengthened my resolve to be a better father, husband, son, just because I know that if I do get Alzheimer's, uh, I'm gonna I'm gonna lose my memories.
Mm,
But I have an opportunity right here, right now, to make good ones with my family. I can share those with them right now, and whenever I lose my memories, they can hold on to theirs,
there you
and
go.
we can have that relationship, if no other way, vicariously through the Lord Himself.
There you
Uh,
go.
so
Yeah,
that's how
that's the
I've been strengthened.
yeah. There you go. Tim, this has been wonderful. We have had to reschedule this. Did we reschedule this once or twice?
Just
I can't
once.
remember. Just once. Yes, yes. I'm glad we were able to sync our schedules because this has been an amazing chat and conversation. I've got a lot to think about. I want to thank you for stopping by. I'm going to put your contact information so people know where to find you online in our liner notes. And I just want to thank you for writing this book and for stopping by to chat with us about it.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been an honor and a genuine privilege. I really appreciate it.
I have a feeling we're going to be working together again in the future.
I hope so. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye bye.